Sir, step back. You're not what we expect in first class. The words cut through the cabin like a slap in church silence. Nicole Vance didn't flinch. She said it with a face that had judged before, her eyes sliding over Julian Carter as if she were sniffing out an intruder. That line, dismissive, sharp, and soaked in prejudice, would go viral within 15 minutes. But in that moment, standing at the front of Horizon Air Flight 228, Julian wasn't thinking about social media. He was just trying to sit in the seat he had paid for. What came next would trigger a national uproar, the collapse of a major airline, and a lesson in what happens when the wrong man is underestimated. Before we dive in, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. If stories of justice, accountability, and real-world impact matter to you, take a moment to subscribe to the channel and give this video a thumbs up. It helps spread this story to more people who need to hear it. Now, let me walk you into what happened when a CEO, a camera phone, and a whole lot of courage came face-to-face with modern airline discrimination. Julian Carter, 48, didn't just run one company, he ran two. Apex Tech, a multi-million-dollar software firm, and Apex Law, a legal powerhouse dedicated to civil rights litigation. Born and raised in Detroit, he made his way up the ladder by refusing to back down, especially in the face of injustice. Today's flight? It was supposed to be just another work trip. He was heading to Nairobi to speak at a global charity summit supporting tech access for underserved youth. He wasn't wearing a suit, just a black blazer over a t-shirt, clean jeans, and polished sneakers. Comfort for a long-haul flight. But apparently, that wasn't first class enough for Nicole Vance or Rachel Brooks, the flight attendants manning the front cabin, as Julian stepped into row 1, ticket in hand. Nicole didn't smile. She barely looked at him. "This seat's for someone else," she said flatly. Julian kept his voice even. "I believe I'm in 1A. She glanced at the digital pass, her eyes narrowing. I'll have to check." That's when Rachel swooped in. "You don't belong here," she said under her breath, not low enough to miss. Julian looked around. Other passengers were starting to stare. That's when Arthur and Helen Bradley made their presence known. "Move him to coach," Arthur said with a scoff. "He's making people uncomfortable," Helen added, clutching her purse with theatric concern. "We paid for peace, not this." And just like that, the captain's voice rang out over the intercom. "Cabin crew, follow seating protocol strictly, no exceptions today." It didn't name Julian, but it might as well have. Michael Hayes, seated a few rows back, couldn't believe what he was seeing. A 45-year-old systems analyst from Wisconsin. Michael had seen his share of travel mishaps, but this felt different. He pulled out his phone, started recording. The footage would later be titled, "Black CEO Humiliated by Airline." At first, it got a few thousand views. Then, it exploded. In the meantime, Julian stood his ground. "This is my assigned seat," he repeated, his tone calm but steady. Nicole crossed her arms. "Sir, we've had a system error. Your boarding pass is invalid. You need to move to economy." Rachel stepped in again. "You heard her. Economy's that way." Behind Julian, passengers were starting to murmur. Some quietly shook their heads. Others pulled out their own phones. Michael leaned toward the aisle and called out, "He paid for 1A! I saw the manifest! He's not in the wrong!" But the crew ignored him. "Step aside!" Nicole snapped. "Now!" Arthur growled. "Don't make a scene," Helen muttered. "He's unsettling." "This is supposed to be a premium experience," Rachel added. "We don't want disruptions in this cabin." Julian's voice didn't rise. He had learned long ago that power isn't always loud. You're making assumptions based on what you see, not what's on that screen. He told Nicole, from his phone. He called Lauren Pierce, his sharp-as-a-razor assistant back at Apex. "Lauren, I'm being denied my seat. Yes, I have the pass. Yes, I'm recording. Her voice, loud and clear over speaker. I'm preparing legal action right now. The tension was thick. Michael's video now showed Nicole flagging Julian's pass as suspicious and possibly fraudulent, citing a glitch in the system. A Reddit post from a few years ago had warned of this exact scenario, a so-called tech error used to mask biased decisions. Michael caught Rachel whispering to Nicole, "He's not our type of first-class guest." And Julian, with the camera trained right on him, said it plainly, "Your bias is showing, and it's being recorded." The murmurs turned into open disapproval. A woman across the aisle said, "This is wrong." A man nearby added, "Let him sit down." But Nicole stood firm. "Sir, you're delaying departure." Rachel gestured down the aisle. "Economy, now!" Julian refused to move. "I paid, I confirmed, and I'm not leaving this seat." The tension kept climbing. Michael's captions flashed. "Horizon Air's racism caught on camera." Julian stood with dignity, refusing to argue, letting the crew hang themselves with every word. Michael's video was gaining traction by the minute. "We're at 1,000 views already," Lauren texted. "Stay calm. Keep filming. Help is coming." Nicole tried again. "You can't stay here," Arthur yelled. "This is ridiculous," Helen added. "He's a threat." That word, threat, changed everything. It wasn't just rude anymore. It was loaded, dangerous. Julian didn't flinch. "You'll regret this," he said, not as a threat, but as a statement of fact. And in less than an hour, those words would ring true. The crew wasn't just refusing a seat. They were about to lose their jobs, their reputations, and help drive their entire company into the ground. But for now, in that narrow aisle of Flight 228, it was one man standing alone, a camera rolling, and the quiet hum of justice getting ready to roar. Nicole's tone sharpened like a blade against glass. "This isn't your place, sir, and I'm beginning to question whether this ticket's even real." She said it just loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. And that was no accident. Julian Carter had faced condescension before, but something about the way Nicole narrowed her eyes and took a step back, like he was a threat to her personal safety, made it clear that this wasn't just a mistake. This was a performance. "It's fraud," Rachel chimed in coldly, standing with arms crossed as if Julian were about to cause a scene, when in fact he hadn't raised his voice once. "Go to economy," she added, nodding toward the back like she was dismissing a child who had wandered into the wrong room. Julian raised his phone calmly and held up the digital boarding pass again. "Scan it," he said, unbothered. "I have the confirmation. You're not going to lie your way out of this." Nicole didn't flinch. "It doesn't match our system anymore. Maybe you doctored it." That accusation of fraud, from a white flight attendant to a black CEO in front of a plane full of people, landed like a slap. Arthur Bradley, seated comfortably with a glass of pre-takeoff champagne, chuckled under his breath. "Told you, he's not first-class material." His wife, Helen, added, "He's a security risk. What if he's dangerous?" At that moment, Michael Hayes, the middle-aged passenger who had already been filming from row 3, couldn't stay silent. "This is outrageous," he said, louder this time, making sure everyone in earshot could hear. "He paid for that seat. I saw him check in. I saw him walk through with us. You're just assuming he doesn't belong." His voice cracked a little, the kind of voice people trust because it's raw with disbelief. Back near the gate, Lauren Pierce was already coordinating with Apex Law's crisis team, balancing 2 phones and a laptop from a quiet corner of the terminal. She had switched to speaker so Julian could hear her calm, calculated words. "They've accused you of fraud, which makes this not just racial profiling, it's defamation. We are preparing a lawsuit right now. I'm reaching media." Julian nodded slightly and adjusted his blazer. I'm staying put. Around him, the tide was shifting. More passengers were frowning. A woman in 2D whispered, "Didn't this happen on another flight last year?" Another man added, "This feels familiar." It wasn't just them. Social media users were already picking up on the pattern. By the time Michael's video passed 100,000 views, people were stitching it with older clips, citing Reddit threads from 2022 about similar incidents. Black professionals being bumped from first class after system errors, accusations of fake tickets, and whispered insults about not looking the part. Julian stood in the middle of all of it, cool and composed. "We're documenting this," Lauren reminded him. "They don't know who they're dealing with." And they didn't. Julian's voice broke the tension again. "Nicole, verify my ticket, publicly, right now, or you'll be held accountable." Nicole's response, "I already told you. It's invalid," Rachel muttered. "It's fake." Loud enough to be picked up on several phones. Arthur leaned into the aisle, shaking his head in performative disgust. "Get him out!" he barked, as if barking orders to a servant. Helen grabbed her designer shawl like she needed to protect herself. "He's making us uncomfortable." The moment wasn't just about race anymore. It was about power, about who gets to define the rules when those rules are already rigged. "You're delaying our departure," Nicole snapped. "The rest of these people want to leave." But Julian didn't budge. "The rest of these people deserve to see the truth," he replied, and the truth was already spreading. Michael's camera caught everything, the body language, the tone, the shifting glances. "I'm contacting the press," he announced to no one in particular, but everyone heard it. "This needs to be public." More phones came out. Even passengers who had been silent began murmuring about past airline scandals. Lauren, still on the line, said, "Julian, do not leave that seat. We have evidence of discriminatory conduct, an invalidated boarding pass, and now an accusation of criminal behavior. This is textbook civil rights litigation." Rachel was now visibly rattled. As Lauren scanned old posts from airline workers, one quote stood out from a 2022 Reddit whistleblower: "We're trained to prioritize passengers who look VIP." That was the language. That was the core of it. The unspoken code that determined who got deference and who got dismissed. And this time, they had said the quiet part out loud. Lauren's ears perked up when a passenger in row 5 muttered, "She literally just said he didn't look VIP enough." Julian heard it too. "Say it again?" he asked calmly. The man hesitated, then repeated it louder. "She said he didn't look the part. I heard her." Michael swung his camera toward Rachel. "Is that how your airline trains you? To pick passengers based on appearance?" Rachel didn't respond. Nicole stiffened, but the damage was already done. Julian pointed at the camera and spoke plainly. "Your prejudice has been recorded. Every word, every lie, every glance. This is going to court, and it's going to the public." The energy on the plane had changed completely. What had started as quiet discomfort was now open tension. Some passengers looked angry, others embarrassed, but no one could look away. This was no longer a misunderstanding. It was a confrontation between bias and truth, between assumed authority and earned dignity. Nicole's voice cracked ever so slightly. "Sir, please step aside, or we will be forced to remove you." Julian raised an eyebrow. "Remove me for what? Having a ticket? Looking like I don't fit your idea of first class?" He turned to the rest of the cabin. "Everyone here saw what happened, and so will the world." And he was right. By the time the plane's doors were even halfway closed, the video had doubled to 2,000 views. Hashtag Julian Carter was trending. So was hashtag Horizon Bias and hashtag 1A Justice. People from every background were reposting, commenting, sharing their own stories. But inside the plane, the crew still hadn't backed down. Nicole looked at Rachel. Rachel looked toward the cockpit. and Arthur, smug, still sipping, said, "They won't do anything. People like him always bark, but they never bite." But that was his mistake. Julian Carter didn't bark. He built legal teams. He filed motions. And within hours, he'd unleash a lawsuit that would send shockwaves through the industry. For now. Though, he sat quietly in seat 1A, right where he belonged. Michael's voice quivered with quiet outrage as he pressed record again. "This is racism in real time," he said to himself, though it was clear he was speaking to the thousands, soon millions, who would be watching. Nicole Vance returned to the aisle with her tablet clutched tightly, face unreadable, posture stiff. "Sir," she said firmly, "your reservation has been updated. You've been reassigned to an economy seat. You'll need to move." Julian Carter stayed composed. "Reassigned by whom?" he asked. Calm and focused, Rachel Brooks stepped in without missing a beat. "System update. It happens sometimes." Her voice was sharp, mechanical. Michael, still filming from his seat, stood up slightly. "Are you kidding?" he said. "You're changing his seat after he's already boarded? That's tampering." Nicole didn't blink. "We reserve the right to adjust seating for the comfort and safety of all passengers," she said, eyes flicking briefly toward Arthur and Helen Bradley, who sat in 1B and 1C with smug expressions. Arthur gave a satisfied huff. "About time," he muttered. The captain's voice soon followed. "This is Captain Mercer. The cabin crew has full authority to enforce seating policy. Please comply." The message was clear. Julian was no longer being pushed. He was being told to leave. Rachel moved to block the aisle, arms crossed like she was guarding a vault. "Move or face security," she said flatly. Her stance was firm, but her voice wavered. Michael stood up now, visibly shaking. "Don't touch him," he warned. "He has a right to that seat, and I've got it all on camera." Around them, murmurs became voices. "You can't do this," someone called out. "Let him sit down." Another added. Nicole raised her voice over the crowd. "This is a company decision. Please remain calm." Julian stayed steady. "Company decisions don't override civil rights. You're breaking the law," Arthur scoffed, sipping champagne. "Get him off the plane already. This is a circus." Helen clutched her purse. "He's dangerous. He won't follow rules." The word dangerous hit harder than anything else. It was the coded language of fear used to justify injustice. Julian didn't move. He simply looked at Nicole and Rachel with quiet defiance. In his hand. His phone was still connected to Lauren Pierce, who now spoke clearly on speaker. "They tampered with your reservation. I just confirmed it. We have the record. Michael's footage shows the moment it was done." Julian's jaw tensed. "Then it's a crime," Lauren responded. "We're saving screenshots, calling press contacts, and preparing an injunction. Don't leave that seat." Michael turned his camera toward Nicole. "What's your name?" he asked, tone flat. "Say it again for the record." Nicole's face went pale. "Stop filming or you'll be reported too." "To who?" Michael shot back. "Your employer?" "Good. They'll need to see this." His phone buzzed. The video had crossed 1 million views. It was already being shared with hashtags like #HorizonBias and #Seat1AJustice. Rachel, unaware her mic was still on, turned to Nicole and muttered, "I told you, he doesn't look like our usual VIPs." It was a whisper, but not quiet enough. Michael froze. "I got that," he said, eyes wide. "She said it." Julian looked at Rachel. "So that's it," he said. "Not my credentials, not my behavior, just my appearance." He turned back to Nicole. "Your bias has now been broadcast. Every word, every change, every lie." Nicole's voice cracked slightly. "You need to move." A passenger in row 2 spoke up. "He's got a point. I've never seen this happen before." Another chimed in. This is wrong, and you all know it. Rachel clenched her jaw. You're delaying the flight. Julian didn't budge. You've already delayed it by tampering with the system. That's on you. Michael angled his phone to capture the moment, stepping into the aisle now. He's right, he said. You moved his seat after he boarded. That's falsification, Nicole shot back. We're following protocol. Julian looked her in the eye. Then your protocol is broken. Behind them. Helen grumbled. This is taking too long, Arthur added. He's grandstanding. Just drag him out already. But the mood in the cabin had shifted. Where there had been silence, there was now resistance. Lauren's voice came through again. Julian, stay where you are. We have a legal right to your seat, and multiple passengers are now witnesses. Rachel looked toward the cockpit. She was rattled. Nicole glanced at her tablet again, tapping with increasing frustration. Nothing she could say would erase the footage now. Michael spoke into the camera, narrating as it unfolded. They tried to remove him, tampered with his reservation. Now they're caught. You're watching it happen. Julian stayed seated, calm but commanding. If you force me to leave, I will sue this airline, and you personally, for racial discrimination, defamation, and breach of contract. This will not go quietly. Passengers around them now openly supported him. A woman across the aisle said, He's doing nothing wrong. Let him fly. A man behind her added, I hope he does, Sue. Nicole stepped back, unsure. Rachel stared at her shoes. Michael's camera caught it all. The fear, the hesitation, the crumbling control. Then Nicole made one last attempt. Security will be called. Julian didn't move. Call them. Let's make it official. Michael's phone buzzed again. The video was at 1.5 million views. Messages from news outlets started rolling in. One of the passengers said, This is going to be on the news tonight. Another nodded. And it should be. Julian looked ahead, composed. All I wanted was the seat I paid for. You turned it into this. At the front of the plane. Rachel received a quiet signal from the cockpit. It was unclear what it meant, but she didn't move forward again. Nicole stood frozen, lips pressed together, behind them. Passengers stared, silent, waiting for the next move. No one was on their side anymore. Julian sat in seat 1A, steady and unmoved, the same place he had walked to 20 minutes earlier. Ticket in hand, without incident. Now, that seat had become a symbol, not of luxury, but of dignity, defiance. And the moment a man refused to be erased, Rachel's hand was trembling slightly now, though she kept it clenched tight around her crew manual like it could shield her from what was happening. Nicole had gone from assertive to frantic, pacing near the galley, whispering furiously into a phone, occasionally glancing toward Julian like he might erupt at any moment, but Julian Carter was still calm, still seated in 1A, arms folded, unbothered. The cabin, however, was on fire with energy, not literal flames, but something just as consuming: outrage, confusion, and a collective awareness that something was very wrong. Nicole returned to Julian's seat one more time, trying a new angle. "Sir, I'm ordering you to comply," she said, but it lacked the bite of her earlier commands. Refusing to follow crew instructions is a violation of FAA regulations. Julian didn't blink. Violating someone's civil rights under color of authority is a federal offense, he replied. The passengers were no longer silent. The woman in 2D raised her phone and started filming. "You're embarrassing yourselves," she said toward the crew. Rachel spun toward her, voice raised. "Ma'am, stop recording or you will be removed too." That only added fuel to the fire. Michael Hayes, already halfway down the aisle with his camera aimed straight at Rachel, shouted, "You're trying to silence people now? What are you hiding?" Nicole stepped toward Michael, raising her hand as if to push the phone aside. "You're disrupting the cabin." "No," Michael countered. "You disrupted this cabin the moment you decided he wasn't VIP enough for first class." Passengers gasped, not because it was new, but because it had been said so clearly. Nicole turned toward Rachel. "We need to get control of this." Rachel nodded, visibly shaken. "Should we call ground?" Nicole answered. "We're supposed to. Captain said to remove them." But it was too late for policy to fix what had already unraveled. As Rachel reached for the intercom, Michael turned his phone back to the crowd and narrated. "They're calling for security now, not for a threat, but for a man who paid for his seat and refused to be degraded." Julian sat silently, letting the chaos unfold around him. His phone lit up with a message from Lauren. "Video at 5.3 M views. I'm getting press calls every 2 minutes. Stay strong." Nicole tried once more. "You've made your point, sir, but this is bigger than you." Julian looked up. "You're absolutely right. It is." Rachel, clearly unraveling, muttered under her breath. "All this drama because we tried to make the flight peaceful." A passenger overheard it. "Peaceful for who?" she snapped. "The couple who didn't want to sit next to a black man?" Arthur Bradley turned toward her and said, "Mind your own business." "This is my business now," she shot back. Standing up, more phones were pointed at the crew. Rachel's voice cracked. "We were just following protocol." Then came the next unraveling thread, a voice from behind Julian, calm and certain. "That's not protocol. That's profiling." It was a quiet man in his early 30s, seat 4A, who hadn't spoken until now. "My sister works for an airline. I know how first-class seating works. They changed his reservation after boarding. That's against every guideline I've read." The plane was no longer just full of observers. It was full of witnesses. And now, they were speaking. A younger woman, seat 3F, pulled up an article on her phone. "This exact thing happened 2 years ago. Different airline, same system error. They settled the case." Michael panned his camera back to Julian. "This is a pattern." Then he turned toward Nicole. "Didn't you just say something about VIPs? Do you want to explain that?" Nicole froze. Rachel tried to step in. "We're not here to debate social issues," she snapped. "We're here to run a safe flight." "Then why does safety only become urgent when someone like him is in this seat?" Julian asked. Calm and quiet, Rachel faltered. Nicole bit her lip, but it was the man in 4A who said it plainly. "Because they've been trained to see someone like you as a problem." That comment sent a wave through the cabin, not loud, but heavy, like a hush filled with guilt and recognition. Nicole tried to take back the room. "We are trained for safety. We're trained for efficiency." "You're trained for optics," Julian said flatly. "And unfortunately for you, the optics are now being broadcast to the entire world." Michael nodded. "I think the world deserves to know what that training looks like." He tapped the screen to show his phone, a leaked screenshot from a 2023 Bloomberg article that was already circulating online. It contained excerpts from a Horizon Air training document advising staff to protect premium seating optics for VIP class passengers and to discourage seating conflicts in front rows through proactive reassignment. "That's your policy, right?" Michael asked. "That's what trained you to see him as a conflict instead of a customer." Nicole didn't answer. Rachel sat down in the jump seat, silent now, head low. Michael continued filming. "So when you say you were just following protocol, what you mean is, this was intentional." Julian pulled his phone out again. "Lauren, they're silent now." Her voice came through, calm and clear. "Stay there. We're coordinating with national media and legal. Don't move an inch." A few rows back, another passenger said, "I came on this flight thinking this was a professional airline, but this is humiliating." A second added, "I hope he takes them down." Rachel looked up, startled. "You're all turning on us," the woman in 2D answered. "No, we're just seeing clearly now." Nicole stood still, arms trembling, eyes unfocused. This wasn't supposed to happen. Julian finally stood up, not to leave, but to speak. "You chose me," he said, voice strong. "Not because I did anything wrong, but because you assumed I didn't belong. That's what your training gave you, the confidence to act on a lie." He gestured around the cabin. "Now, all of them see it. And now, the world will too." He sat back down slowly, the way someone sits not in defiance, but in rightful possession of their space. Rachel reached for the intercom one last time, but her hand froze halfway up. Michael looked toward her. "Do it. Call for backup. Let security walk in here and see the cameras, the evidence, the witnesses. Let them explain this to the world when they ask why a man in a blazer and jeans was told he's not VIP enough to fly." The plane was quiet again, not from fear, but from awakening. Everyone had seen it. No one could deny it now. The cabin fell into a heavy silence as Rachel slowly lowered her hand from the intercom. Eyes wide, her composure unraveling in front of dozens of witnesses. Nicole, standing stiffly by the galley door, had lost her earlier control. Her jaw clenched, hands shaking slightly, and eyes darting toward Julian, whose presence in seat 1A had become more than a protest. It had become a reckoning. Then came the moment no one expected, the sound of polished shoes and urgent voices in the boarding tunnel. Within seconds, two sharply dressed executives stepped into the cabin. Richard Ellison, the sharp-tempered chief operating officer of Horizon Air, and Susan Caldwell, the company's no-nonsense chief legal officer. They didn't stop to apologize. Not yet. Their eyes swept the cabin and landed directly on Julian, who looked up without flinching. "Mr. Carter," Richard said, voice firm. "We've been briefed." Lauren's voice came through Julian's phone again, crystal clear. "They're here. Stick to the facts." Susan stepped in front of Rachel and Nicole, who were visibly stunned. "This stops now," she said. Then she turned back to the passengers, raising her voice just enough to be heard across the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience. We are correcting a grave error." And just like that, the room shifted. Nicole opened her mouth to object, but Richard cut her off. "You're done." Rachel stepped forward. "We followed protocol," she pleaded. He didn't look, but Susan raised a hand. "Stop talking." Rachel froze. "You're both relieved of duty. Effective immediately." The captain's voice came over the intercom, but instead of an announcement, there was only a click, then silence. "Captain Mercer," Richard snapped, pulling out his phone, "will also be relieved upon landing. We will not tolerate misconduct from the flight deck either." The gasps in the cabin weren't just from the firing, they were from the speed, the certainty, the finality of it. Julian stood up slowly, meeting their eyes. "Too little? Too late?" he asked. Susan shook her head. "We're not here for image control," she said. "We're here because we saw the footage, because millions saw it, and because what happened here goes against everything this airline claims to stand for." Michael panned his phone around the cabin, whispering into the camera. "They're fired. All three of them." His video passed 20 million views within minutes. Passengers were clapping now, not cheering, but applauding the moment, not just the firings, but the first sign of accountability. "As of this moment," Susan continued, "Horizon Air will be issuing a formal public apology. Mr. Carter, you will receive a personal letter from the board, and pending legal review, we are offering immediate compensation." Richard stepped forward, clearing his throat. "We're authorizing a $1 million restitution payment to Mr. Carter. No conditions. We know that's not enough, but it's a start." Julian nodded slowly. "That'll go to charity," he said, without hesitation. "All of it." Lauren's voice buzzed again through the speaker. "Excellent. We'll confirm the wire and continue with the lawsuit." Richard glanced at the phone, then at Julian. "You're still suing us?" Julian answered with no bitterness, just calm resolve. "Absolutely." Nicole's mouth opened again, shaky now. "We didn't mean to." But she stopped. Her voice cracked. "Arthur and Helen said he made them feel unsafe. They insisted he be moved." Rachel turned to her in disbelief. "Don't say that," she hissed. But it was too late. That sentence had already been spoken into a cabin full of witnesses, and captured on at least 4 separate phones. Arthur tried to interject. "We never—" But Helen elbowed him hard. "Don't say anything." Nicole broke. "They said he was aggressive. That it was going to be a scene. I just acted on what they said. I didn't want problems," Rachel snapped. "You dragged me into this." Michael turned the camera toward Julian. "How do you feel?" Julian exhaled. "Tired," he said simply, but not surprised. The passengers sat silently as the truth spilled out, piece by piece. Rachel turned toward Michael and tried to cover his phone. "Please stop filming." He didn't move. "No," he said. "You don't get to silence this now." Susan Caldwell spoke again, voice quieter this time. "We will be launching an independent investigation into all discrimination complaints filed against Horizon staff in the last 5 years. She paused. "This flight has made something clear. We have a systemic issue, not just a personnel one." Richard nodded. "And effective immediately. All flight crews will undergo new anti-bias training, not the watered-down version we've been running." One passenger leaned toward another and whispered, "Why did it take something this public to make them act?" But Julian heard it. "Because silence doesn't move power," he replied. "Pressure does." He turned to Richard. "Make sure this isn't a PR stunt." "It's not," Richard said, almost too quickly. "And if it ever becomes one, I won't be here to see it." Lauren's voice chimed back in. "Media's everywhere now. Washington Post, ABC, Reuters, it's front-page material." Michael's phone buzzed again. He showed Julian the screen, 27 million views and climbing. Comments flooded in from lawyers, activists, and regular folks who had stories of their own, all tagging Horizon Air, demanding action. "We're issuing a press release within the hour," Susan said. "We'll take full responsibility." Rachel finally sat down in the jump seat, silent, defeated. Nicole leaned against the wall near the galley, eyes watery, the reality sinking in. Arthur folded his arms in frustration. "This is madness," he said, half under his breath. "He's playing the victim." Susan turned sharply. "You can be escorted off too. Mr. Bradley, watch your words." Helen clutched her bag tighter, staring at the window. "This isn't how first class used to be," she muttered. "Good," said a woman across the aisle. Julian sat again, not because he had to, but because he'd earned the right to rest. "We'll see you in court," he said. "And not just for this flight, for every person who wasn't recorded, for every incident that didn't go viral." He wasn't smiling, but there was a quiet strength in his voice that needed no applause. "Change doesn't come when you whisper," he added. "It comes when the truth is louder than the lie." Michael lowered his camera. "That was incredible," he said. Julian didn't respond. He just looked out the window at the tarmac, the sky, the runway still waiting for takeoff, and perhaps for something more. The cabin was quiet again, but it wasn't the silence of fear anymore. It was the silence of reckoning. Within hours of the confrontation aboard Horizon Air Flight 228, news of the incident had ignited a nationwide storm. The video captured by Michael Hayes had now soared past 35 million views, reposted by civil rights organizations, travel watchdogs, and major media outlets. Stock analysts began to ring the alarm. Horizon Air's parent company opened the next trading day with a 70% drop, wiping out billions in value. Shareholders scrambled for answers. Executives scrambled for cover. On board the flight, change was already unfolding. Nicole, Rachel, and Captain Mercer had been formally removed from duty and escorted off the aircraft. The new crew, Lisa Torres and Mark Evans, boarded quietly and respectfully, introducing themselves to every passenger, including Julian Carter, who remained seated in 1A. "We're here to serve," Mark said softly, making direct eye contact. "No exceptions, no bias." Julian nodded, accepting the gesture, but not forgetting the damage already done. Susan Caldwell stayed behind to manage the public fallout, coordinating statements and internal briefings, while Richard Ellison prepared emergency communications to regulators and investors. Lauren Pierce, now on her way to Nairobi to join Julian in person, texted him updates from the gate. "All major outlets are carrying it live. You're everywhere." Michael watched his phone screen glow with comments, support, legal offers, and even messages from former airline employees who'd witnessed similar incidents in silence. One message, however, stood out, an anonymous tip containing a leaked memo from Horizon's corporate management, dated 18 months prior. It instructed staff to discreetly protect first-class cabin aesthetics and to be mindful of passenger perception in premium zones. It wasn't outright racism, but it was calculated discrimination in coded language. Lauren called Julian instantly. "We've got the smoking gun," she said. "They've been training for bias under the disguise of brand image." Julian leaned back in his seat, hands folded in thought. "Then we don't just sue," he said. "We audit." The passengers nearby had heard fragments of the conversation, and one of them, a retired teacher from Minnesota, leaned over and whispered, "Thank you for not backing down. My grandson needed to see this," another passenger simply said. "I'm sorry. I didn't speak up earlier." Julian nodded once, with grace but no pretense. He wasn't here for apologies. He was here for change. Lisa, the new flight attendant, approached and asked gently if Julian needed anything. "Just fairness," he replied. "That's all I ever asked for." Meanwhile, Captain Mercer's refusal to immediately release control of the flight had delayed takeoff for nearly an hour earlier that day. That detail, now leaked, led to further scrutiny. A Reuters article broke the story that Mercer had previously been the subject of 2 internal complaints, both related to racially charged passenger altercations. Neither complaint had been acted on. Now, reporters were asking why. Stock tickers continued to slide. Several corporate sponsors and partners began pulling contracts with Horizon's loyalty program. "This isn't about optics anymore," one investor said. "It's about ethics." Within internal chat logs, employees quietly voiced relief that someone had finally blown the lid off what they called a culture of polite exclusion. Susan Caldwell, in a conference call with the board, stated plainly, "We've built a brand on service, and we just exposed our rot at the core." Julian, now mid-flight toward Nairobi, was watching the impact unfold in real time, not with pride, but with purpose. "Let's turn this pain into policy," he told Lauren by phone. "Let's make sure no one has to film to prove they're telling the truth." In the cool air of a Nairobi conference room overlooking the hills, Julian Carter stood quietly beside a glass wall, his phone glowing with headlines he didn't need to read. He already knew the outcome. Just one day after the confrontation aboard Horizon Air Flight 228, the company filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy in a New York court. Their assets were being sold off to competitors, and multiple lawsuits had followed Julian's, stacking up behind his with similar allegations, familiar patterns, and long-buried proof. He had settled for $20 million, not for silence, but for impact. Every cent of that money had already been allocated to a newly established aviation equity fund under the Apex Foundation, aimed at training flight crews in anti-bias education, hiring diverse executives, and supporting whistleblowers inside the travel industry. Michael Hayes's video had now passed 50 million views. News outlets called it the footage that changed everything. Activists called Julian a civil rights figure for the modern travel era. Julian didn't call himself anything. He didn't need to. The truth had spoken for him, louder than any press release or polished apology could have, back home. Horizon Air's CEO and legal head, Richard Ellison and Susan Caldwell, had both stepped down, holding a final press conference in which they acknowledged not just their failure to act, but the company's willful blindness to years of complaints. "We should have listened sooner," Susan had said. "He gave us no choice." As Julian prepared to speak at the Nairobi summit that had originally prompted his flight, a reporter asked what victory looked like to him. He replied, "Not money, not fame. Victory is knowing I didn't walk away when they told me I didn't belong." In the days that followed, Julian received thousands of letters, some from passengers on the flight, others from young professionals across the globe who had been denied opportunity for reasons that were never stated out loud, but always understood. Lauren handled media coordination, legal interviews, and policy consulting while Julian quietly planned the next steps. "This was never about one seat," he told her. "It was about every seat someone like me was told to give up." Horizon Air's brand had become toxic. Former sponsors distanced themselves, and airline alliances removed the company from their partner lists. But the fallout wasn't limited to finances. The FAA opened a civil rights audit, and members of Congress introduced new legislation aimed at holding airline executives personally liable for systemic discrimination. Meanwhile, airport monitors across the country still displayed the Horizon logo, a name now synonymous with bias and corporate negligence. Yet Julian's goal wasn't destruction, it was reform, and change was already happening. Several airlines voluntarily adopted new anti-bias policies modeled after Apex Law's recommendations. Julian personally funded training programs, guest taught at law schools, and hired former flight attendants of color who had faced discrimination from their own crews. But the biggest shock came a week later, when an anonymous whistleblower published an internal thread of emails on Reddit. The messages revealed that Horizon executives had been made aware of similar incidents years earlier and had chosen to suppress reports to protect the brand. One line in particular stood out: "If these videos ever go public, we'll face reputational collapse." The thread included transcripts from at least 4 crew training sessions that encouraged selective discretion in seating decisions and referred to certain passengers as presentation risks. When Julian saw those words, he simply said, "They knew, they just didn't think they'd get caught." The Reddit post went viral in hours, validating the accounts of dozens who had come forward after seeing Michael's footage. For Horizon, it sealed their fate. For Julian, it confirmed the value of every quiet refusal to back down, every recorded second, every word spoken with restraint rather than rage. Back in Nairobi, a familiar voice called out to him in the airport lounge. Nicole Vance, no longer in uniform, her hair loose and demeanor subdued, stood near the hallway, flanked by local security. "You ruined everything," she said under her breath, anger sharp in her eyes. "You could have let it go." Julian turned to her with quiet clarity. "You ruined it the moment you decided my presence was a threat." When she tried to approach again, guards intervened and escorted her away without incident. She never said another word. It was a final. Quiet moment that symbolized not revenge, but consequence. Julian didn't speak of it again. He didn't need to. The world had watched. 6 months later. The industry looked different. Julian's foundation had already funded over 20 programs for ethical crew training. Several whistleblowers were now in leadership roles. Schools used his story as a case study in law and ethics, and across airports worldwide. Signage began to reflect a new commitment to equity, not just in word, but in practice. Julian didn't seek credit. He kept his head down and his mission clear, because for him, legacy was never the seat. It was making sure no one else had to stand just to be seen.